Hey guys, today I'm going to look at a scenario involving balance ranges versus kind of face-up hands, face-up medium strength hands. And this is a kind of scenario that can happen in your games where you have kind of a medium strength made hand and your opponent is betting aggressively on the flop and turn, representing either a set or, two pair or some kind of draw. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit is that in these kind of spots, but especially, just in general, thinking too much about your equity versus your opponent's range rather than kind of the balance of your range versus your opponent's and the strategic options that opens up for you is usually going to be a big mistake, because a lot of hands, especially kind of the medium strength ones, the marginal ones, they have no way to get to showdown, and your equity only matters if you actually get to showdown. So I set up a very simple scenario here that is in no way a real poker scenario that would happen. This is just a way to model this kind of nuts or air scenario. So I put in a board that's just 5 cards. It doesn't matter. They're all low. And I gave the hero, who has the nuts or air range here, either aces or queens. Aces representing the nuts and queens representing air. And I gave the villain kings. So the villain always has kind of an in-between hand that beats half of his opponent's range and loses to half. So they both have exactly 50% equity, and if you were kind of equity focused, you might say, well, it doesn't really matter which, no player has a big advantage here. It doesn't matter who you are. But it turns out that the nuts or air range is going to win drastically more of the pot than the mid-strength range. And I show this in the blog post that's linked to in the comments. I show how even just kind of a brain-dead strategy will let the nuts or air player get well over half the pot. An easy way to just kind of see offhand that that's the case is, as long as the nuts or air player always bets the nuts, he's going to win half the time, unless he folds the nuts. So he's going to win half the time for sure, and it's just how much can he squeak out of the air. And the answer is, a lot, and it kind of depends on the stack sizes. So let's take a look at this in GTO Range Builder. I set up a scenario exactly matching my blog post. There's 60 BB pot, 120 BB left to bet, and we can just click calculate, and it'll bring up a scenario for us. So in this scenario, the hero's EV is 50 and the villain's EV is 10. And this Nash distance is how close to equilibrium is. This is saying it's extremely close. So, even though they have 50% equity, the nuts or air range walks away with 84.4% of the pot. And let's look a little bit at how exactly that happens. Basically, the player with kings always has to check. That's pretty clear, because if he bets, he's only getting called by aces and never by queens, and he's just burning money. And then the hero, who has the nuts or air range here, he's going to raise to 120. That's shoving. He's always shoving his aces, and he's shoving his queens about 2/3 of the time. And then he's check folding, checking back his queens the other third. And this puts our king player in a difficult position where he's facing a range that is 60% the nuts, 40% air, and that's exactly what makes him indifferent from calling, because when he calls, he wins 120, or he loses 120 when he's incorrect, and he wins 180 when he is correct. So as you can see, his EV with kings is just about 0. These are just kind of rounding errors. My solver gets very close, but not exactly right, which is why these numbers aren't exactly 0. And there you have it. It's actually a really simple path. And often people say, I don't need to worry about Nash strategies because they're too complicated. No one's going to play that well. In this case, this is really a pretty simple strategy that even a fish would kind of figure out. Bet the nuts a lot and your air sometimes, and they certainly might not get the bet your queen 66%, but they are likely going to bet at some. They're going to know to bluff some, and however much they bluff is going to cost you unless they fold the air, they're winning 50%, and then they're just hurting you more and more with their bluffs. A few other things I want to take a look at here that are kind of interesting. I did put the nuts or air player in position, so you might feel that some of this advantage comes from position, but it actually doesn't. If I just flip the ranges here, like that, and rerun it, as you can see here, now the villain gets 50 and the hero gets 10. Position really has nothing to do with it. this is just a question of range balance. The other thing that's kind of interesting to see is how important range balance versus range equity is. Really depends on how deep you are. If there's not a lot of money left to bet, you're going to be able to get to showdown and see your equity a lot more often. So we say, all that's left is a half pot bet, and throw that in here. The hero has king kings. His EV doubles. He does way better in that situation, but still, well less than the 50% of his equity. If we say the stacks are, enormous, put it up to say 1,000. It's going to make a big tree. And as we can see here, the Nuts Rare player gets 57.11 out of 60. Basically, as the stacks get infinitely large, the king player starts to get 0 of the pot because the threat of a giant bet is just too big to ever let you see a showdown. So I think I'll leave this video here. I'd love to get any feedback from you guys. This is the first video that's kind of made. Both on, was this helpful, was this presentation clear, but also if there's any other scenarios you'd be interested in me looking at, if you have any questions about this analysis, definitely check out the blog post that's linked to in the YouTube comments, because I go into a bit more depth on kind of where this EV differential is actually coming from in the blog than I did in this video. And thanks for watching.